That's Karen Henderson standing in my cornfield in a $1,000 wedding dress, right before I dumped 500 gallons of liquefied cow manure on her and 300 of her closest friends. How'd we get here? Well, when the HOA decided my farm was the perfect spot for their unauthorized community wedding, I decided it was the perfect spot for my regularly scheduled fertilizer drop, and I wasn't about to reschedule. I always said there were two kinds of people in this world: the ones who mind their own business and the ones who think the whole world is theirs to manage. Before Karen showed up, I lived a simple life, a good life. I ran a modest crop farm on the outskirts of a sleepy rural town, nestled right against the last patch of real wildland this side of the county. My days started before the sun rose and ended long after it dipped below the fields, usually with dirt under my fingernails and the satisfied ache of a day's work well spent. I had a battered but beloved old crop duster, a 1967 Grumman Ag Cat that I'd inherited from my uncle. Every season, I'd scheduled 2 fertilizer runs over my fields, one in early spring, one right after midsummer. It wasn't fancy, but it got the job done. I'd load up the tanks with a pungent brew designed to give the crops a boost and take to the skies, buzzing low over my land like a hawk surveying its territory. It was a ritual almost as old as the farm itself. For years, nobody cared. For years, nobody bothered me. Until Karen moved in. Karen Henderson, newly elected president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, rolled into town like a hurricane in a minivan. She wasn't just some nosy neighbor, she was a force of nature wrapped in pastel cardigans, armed with clipboards, newsletters, and a pathological obsession with community events. Word spread fast that she was holding HOA meetings twice a week, organizing volunteer landscaping crews to repaint mailboxes, and handing out citations like they were free samples at the county fair. Her house was the first to get a professionally manicured lawn so symmetrical it looked like it had been drawn with a protractor. Next came the Community Welcome Center she built out of her own garage, complete with a mural of smiling cartoon houses and stick-figure children holding balloons. At first, it was all contained to Willow Creek. I figured if folks wanted to live like prisoners in their own pastel-painted Stepford utopia, that was their business. But Karen's ambitions didn't stop at her picket fence. No, sir. Pretty soon, she started leading what she called nature walks, guided tours through the open fields that, unfortunately, included my property. I found the first group on a Saturday morning, a line of yoga pants wearing suburbanites, carrying iced coffees, and pointing at my soybean rows like they were at some kind of botanical garden. Karen was right at the front. Big straw hat perched on her blonde head, waving her clipboard like a baton. When I confronted her, polite at first, I'm no savage, she gave me a blinding fake smile and said, "Oh, we're just appreciating the beauty of our shared spaces." I corrected her firmly. This wasn't a shared space. This was my land, privately owned, taxes paid up, no easements, no rights of way. She nodded like she was listening and then handed me a pamphlet on Stewardship of Community Greenbelts. That was when the violation notices started appearing. Little neon slips folded neatly into my mailbox, citing me for everything from unauthorized land maintenance to unsightly agricultural practices, whatever that was supposed to mean. I laughed the first time, crumpled the second. By the third, I started saving them in a shoebox, knowing deep down that things were about to get worse. Karen filed complaints with the county about my fertilizer runs, claiming the odor was a public nuisance. She put up hand-painted signs along the dirt road leading to my farm that read, "Please respect community property," with a little HOA logo at the bottom. She posted photos of my tractor on the Willow Creek HOA Facebook page, tagging them with captions like, "Local eyesore or town tradition? You decide." Every week brought some new insult, some new act of passive-aggressive warfare. And I kept doing what I always did, tending my fields, minding my business, flying my little plane, and thinking that if I just ignored her long enough, she'd lose interest. But Karen wasn't the type to lose interest. No, Karen was the type to escalate. By midsummer, the rumors started. Karen was going door to door in Willow Creek, clipboard in hand, talking about a historic easement that allegedly granted the community shared use of my fields. She said the farm was Originally intended as a communal green space when the development was first platted, which was a bold claim considering my family had owned this land since 1904. A full 80 years before Willow Creek Estates was a gleam in some developer's eye. Karen wasn't letting facts get in her way. She circulated petitions. She gathered signatures. She printed up glossy flyers with a Photoshop picture of my fields, transformed into a community arboretum and event garden. In her fantasy, there were pergolas and fountains and jogging trails where my wheat currently grew. I found one of her flyers stuffed under my windshield wiper at the gas station. Imagine the possibilities. It chirped in bubble letters above a cartoonish drawing of my barn converted into a wedding venue. She even held a town hall meeting at the Willow Creek Clubhouse, where she presented her case to a room full of bored, restless suburbanites desperate for something to care about. "This land belongs to all of us," she said, voice trembling with full passion. "It's time to reclaim our community's heart." She talked about reconnecting to nature, about celebrating rural heritage, about building a sustainable future together. Not once did she mention the fact that she didn't own a square inch of my farm. When one of the few sensible voices in the room, old Mr. Ficton's 30 accent, scanned the room. Harmon, who'd grown up in this town, stood up and said, "Ain't that Jenkins' land? Always has been." Karen just smiled tightly and said, "That's a complicated legal issue we're working to clarify." Clarify. Like somehow my deed, the one filed with the county clerk and stamped in triplicate, was up for interpretation. That night, I sat on my porch, a bottle of cheap beer sweating in my hand, staring out at my fields under the silver light of the moon. I thought about my grandfather planting the first rows here by hand, about my father flying the first fertilizer run in the same plane I now piloted. I thought about the hours I'd spent fixing that old plane, painting it barn red, feeling like I was stitching time itself back together with every bolt tightened. This land wasn't just dirt to me. It was blood and sweat and stories and bones. It was memory. It was home. And Karen Henderson, HOA queen, clipboard warrior, self-appointed steward of all things beautiful, thought she could take it from me with a petition and a fake easement claim. That's when I realized something deep in my gut, something cold and certain. Karen wasn't going to stop, not until she was made to. Not until she learned the hard way that some people don't just roll over when you wave a clipboard at them. Some people fight back. I set down my beer, pulled out my planner, and flipped to the upcoming Saturday, the day I'd scheduled my annual midsummer fertilization flyover. My pen hovered over the date for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, I circled it. Twice. The first time I caught them, it was a Sunday morning just after dawn, when the light was still soft and everything smelled like wet soil and honeysuckle. I was out by the back fence checking the irrigation lines when I spotted movement out in the east field. At first, I thought it might be deer, not uncommon that time of year, but when I squinted against the sunrise, what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't deer, it was people, a lot of people. Maybe 24 of them, spread out across my soybean rows, unrolling yoga mats and laying down picnic blankets like they owned the place. I stood there frozen, a wrench dangling from my hand, as a woman in neon leggings led a group of middle-aged suburbanites through what appeared to be a very spirited session of sun salutation. At the head of it all, of course, stood Karen Henderson herself, clipboard tucked under one arm, beaming like a queen surveying her kingdom. I marched down the dirt path toward them, boots kicking up little puffs of dust, heart hammering in my chest. Karen spotted me when I was about 20 feet away and had the audacity to wave like we were old friends. "Good morning," she chirped. "Isn't it a beautiful day to center ourselves in nature?" I stopped dead in front of her, crossing my arms over my chest. "Karen," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice from shaking, "what the hell do you think you're doing on my land?" She blinked at me, all innocent blue eyes and Botox. "Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't you see the announcement? This is part of our new community wellness initiative. Sunrise, yoga, and meditation in the heart of Willow Creek." She gestured expansively at my field, as if I should be honored by the invasion. I stared at her, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "This isn't Willow Creek. This is my private farm. You have no right to be here." Karen's smile tightened just slightly at the edges. Well, technically, that's still under discussion. We're working with the county to clarify the easement boundaries. That was a lie. There was no easement. There had never been an easement. But Karen had figured out something about people, say a thing confidently enough, wrap it in just enough bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo, and most folks will nod along and accept it. Not me. I pointed back toward the dirt road. Get off my land. Karen gave a little theatrical sigh, like I was a difficult child. All right, everyone, let's relocate to the Community Welcome Center, she called out, clapping her hands. The yoga group grumbled, rolling up their mats and shuffling back toward the road, throwing me dirty looks like I was the one ruining their morning. As they left, I noticed something new. Small wooden stakes hammered into the ground at regular intervals along the edge of my field. Each one topped with a bright orange flag that read, Future Willow Creek Community Gardens. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. I yanked one of the stakes out of the ground and snapped it over my knee. Karen watched me do it, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled again, cool and bright as a winter sunrise. Change is hard for some people, she said sweetly, and walked away. That night, I drove the perimeter of my property with a spotlight mounted to the roof of my old Ford. Everywhere I looked, I found more signs. Cheap laminated ones zip-tied to my fences and gates. Coming soon, community picnic area, future site of the Willow Creek Butterfly Garden. Proposed pavilion and family fun zone. It was like a virus, spreading faster than I could tear it down. I spent 2 hours ripping down every last one, muttering curses under my breath, throwing the shredded remains into the bed of my truck. But the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I opened my mailbox and found a fresh copy of the Willow Creek Estates HOA newsletter. Right there on the front page, under a full-color photo of my own damn barn, was a headline that read, Exciting Changes Ahead, Introducing the Heart of Willow Creek, our new community green space. The article went on to gush about how the HOA was in discussions to reclaim and repurpose the farm fields for public enrichment, painting a picture of walking trails, rose gardens, farmers markets, and open-air concerts, all happening on land they didn't own, didn't lease, and had no legal claim to whatsoever. My hands shook as I crumpled the paper, veins pounding at my temples. It wasn't just petty anymore. It wasn't just trespassing. They were rewriting reality, gaslighting the entire community into believing that my home, my livelihood, was already theirs. And Karen, sweet, smiling, clipboard-wielding Karen, was leading the charge. I decided enough was enough. I called up my lawyer, Joe Hardy, a crusty old bulldog who'd spent 40 years suing everyone from crooked contractors to corrupt school boards. Joe wasn't fancy, but he was mean, and he knew how to write a cease and desist letter that could peel paint off a wall. Within 24 hours, he had a stack of legal documents drafted and mailed to the Willow Creek HOA, explicitly outlining the trespasses, the false claims, the unauthorized signage, and the damage to my property. We included copies of my deed, satellite images from the county assessor's office, and even a notarized affidavit from the previous land surveyor confirming that no public easements existed. I thought foolishly that would be the end of it, but Karen, bless her sociopathic little heart, had other ideas. The very next Saturday, I woke up to the sound of cars, lots of cars, crunching down the dirt road toward my farm. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my hat, and went outside just in time to see a caravan of minivans, SUVs, and even a couple of tour buses rolling to a stop along the edge of my fields. Out poured families in matching t-shirts that read, Willow Creek Community Garden Kickoff Day. Kids clutched baskets for picking produce. Adults carried folding chairs and coolers. Someone was setting up a bouncy house. I stood there stunned, mouth hanging open, as Karen, dressed in a khaki vest and sun hat like some kind of budget safari guide, clambered onto the tailgate of a pickup truck and lifted a megaphone to her mouth. Welcome everyone to our first official community garden tour, she bellowed, the sound echoing off the hills. This is a historic day for Willow Creek as we reclaim our shared heritage and build a greener future together. The crowd cheered. Karen spotted me standing there, red-faced and shaking, and had the audacity to wave again like we were old friends. I didn't even bother yelling. I stormed back into my house, grabbed the folder of legal documents Joe had prepared, and marched straight over to where Karen was handing out garden maps to eager families. I slapped the paperwork into her hands hard enough to make the megaphone wobble. "You are trespassing," I said, voice low and deadly calm. "You are illegally organizing events on private property. You have been officially warned. If you do not vacate immediately, I will call the sheriff, file criminal charges, and sue the HOA for every penny it has and then some." For the first time, Karen's smile faltered. Only for a second. Then she recovered, pasted on that Stepford wife grin, and said into the megaphone, "All right, everyone, slight change of plans. Let's relocate to the clubhouse for our garden activities." The crowd booed and grumbled, but eventually started packing up their gear. As they shuffled past me, I caught snippets of conversation, complaints about that stubborn farmer, jokes about how they should just bulldoze it already, mutters about how the community deserves better. I stood there, heart pounding, fists clenched at my sides, watching them retreat like a flood draining back into the sewer where it belonged. And deep down in the pit of my gut, I knew something ugly and inevitable. They weren't giving up. Karen wasn't giving up. They declared war. The email came in at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning, right as I was sitting down with my first cup of coffee. I didn't recognize the sender at first, some fancy events company with a name like Willow Vine Weddings. I almost deleted it, figuring it was more spam about floral arrangements or country club memberships I didn't want. But something in the subject line stopped me cold. Updated catering timeline for Henderson Wedding, Jenkins Property Venue. My stomach dropped into my boots. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. There, in painstaking detail, was a full timeline for a wedding scheduled 3 Saturdays from now, right smack in the middle of my busiest planting season, and the location listed was my land. Specifically, the south field, perimeter lined with white chairs, altar arch installed facing sunset, reception tent, 40-60 feet, placed adjacent to the east corn rows. Portable restroom delivery Friday night. I read it twice, my hands getting sweatier with each pass. It wasn't just a casual gathering. It was a full-blown wedding ceremony and reception for 300 guests. Caterers, photographers, DJs, generators, lighting towers, floral trucks, restroom trailers, even golf carts rented to shuttle guests from the gravel road to the field. I leaned back in my chair, the email glowing on my laptop screen like some cruel cosmic joke. I stared out the window at my fields, my neatly tilled rows, the very lifeblood of my farm, and imagined hundreds of strangers stomping through it in stilettos and dress shoes, spilling champagne and grinding the young shoots into muddy pulp. I felt something cold and heavy settle in my gut. I grabbed my wall calendar, the one tacked above my kitchen sink, and thumbed through the pages to May. There it was, already circled in black Sharpie. May 14th, 9:00 a.m. scheduled fertilizer flyover north and south fields. It wasn't just the same weekend, it was the same day. The same time. I sat there for a long moment, heart pounding in my ears, staring at the perfect collision course fate had laid out in front of me. I could almost hear the engines of my crop duster purring in the background, feel the weight of the fertilizer tanks sloshing, smell the heady, ripe stink of the mixture I had pre-ordered for extra potency this year. I opened my email again and scanned the timeline. Ceremony start time, 10:00 a.m. Cocktail hour, 11:00 a.m. Reception tent open, noon. It was almost poetic. But first, I had to be sure. I couldn't just show up and ruin someone's wedding without knowing all the facts. I drove straight into town and stormed into the Willow Creek Estates HOA office, where the walls were plastered with motivational posters about community spirit and shared prosperity. Karen was behind the reception desk, chattering brightly into a headset, "White piece of ball." But when she saw me coming, her smile froze halfway up her face. "Mr. Jenkins," she chirped, pulling off the headset. "What a surprise! What can I do for you today?" I slapped the printed catering email down on the counter between us. "You can explain this," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Karen blinked, recovered, and picked up the paper delicately like it might be contaminated. She skimmed it, her face smoothing into that infuriating mask of benign condescension she wore like armor. "Oh, this?" she said lightly. "Yes, the Henderson wedding. Isn't it exciting? It's going to be a beautiful event for the whole community." "On my land," I said flatly. "Without my permission." Karen set the paper down and folded her hands primly. "Well, technically, the HOA has authorized temporary community use of the field. Given the ongoing discussions about its status as a future green space, we felt it appropriate to allow a special event that celebrates our shared values." My fists clenched at my sides. "You have no authority to authorize anything. That land is privately owned. You know that. You've seen the deed." Karen's smile tightened. "There's some ambiguity about that, actually. Our legal team is looking into the historical use of the property and the implied community rights. In the meantime, we didn't want to delay the celebration. After all, love waits for no one." She gave a little tinkling laugh like bells ringing in hell. I stared at her, feeling my pulse hammering against my skull. "You are trespassing," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Every truck, every tent, every porta-potty you put on that field is an act of trespass." "You're lucky I don't call the sheriff right now." Karen sighed, like I was a particularly slow student she had been forced to tutor. "Mr. Jenkins, this community thrives on goodwill and flexibility. If you choose to be difficult about this, well, that's your choice. But just know that the entire town will see who's really standing in the way of progress and happiness." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping into something almost pitying. "Do you really want to be the man who ruined a young couple's wedding day?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. Not because I didn't have any, but because in that moment a plan was already crystallizing in the back of my mind. I didn't slam my fists down. I didn't shout. I simply picked up the email, folded it neatly back into my pocket, and turned to walk out, my boots heavy on the cheap tile floor. Behind me, Karen's voice floated after me, syrupy sweet. "We'd still love to have you attend, Mr. Jenkins. Community is about inclusion, after all." I drove back to the farm in a fog, the rage simmering low and steady inside me like coals banked for a fire. I parked my truck by the barn, climbed up into the loft where I kept my old maps and maintenance logs, and double-checked every note, every calendar entry, every invoice for my fertilizer order. It was all set in stone. The supplier was delivering the load on Friday. The tanks would be filled Saturday morning. My flyover window, coordinated weeks in advance with the tiny municipal airstrip I used, was locked in for 9:00 a.m. sharp. And nowhere, in any of my plans, was there an allowance for 300 people trespassing on my land, trampling my future crops into confetti, and treating my home like their personal amusement park. I climbed back down, went into the house, and sat at the kitchen table with my old flight manual spread out before me. Page after page of checklists, safety procedures, emergency maneuvers. I found the section on payload drops underlined in red. Ensure dispersal areas are clear of personnel to prevent injury. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I got up, poured myself a strong cup of coffee, and sat back down, smiling slowly as the plan wrote itself across my mind's eye. I wasn't going to stop the wedding. No, Karen had made it very clear that any attempt to cancel would be spun against me in the court of public opinion. I wasn't going to call the sheriff. That would take too long, and by the time the bureaucrats finished squabbling about easements and permissions, the damage to my field would be done. No, I was going to let them have their day. Every pastel-draped, rose-petaled, Instagram-filtered minute of it. And when the moment came when Karen stood under her white satin archway, smiling her smug victory smile, surrounded by 300 uninvited guests on my land, I was going to fertilize them, from the sky. Saturday morning dawned hot and still, the kind of heavy, shimmering heat that makes the horizon look like it's breathing. I was up before first light, standing in the shadow of my old Grumman Agcat, its red paint faded but proud, its engine ticking quietly as I finished my final checks. The fertilizer was loaded, a special custom blend I'd ordered just for the fallow fields, extra rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, with a hearty dose of liquefied cow manure, to really make the mixture cling. The supplier had even thrown in a little something extra, a sludge they normally used for orchard ground rejuvenation, the kind that soaked deep into the soil and anything else it touched, with a smell you could taste on the back of your tongue for days. I did one last walk around of the plane, running my hand over the battered fuselage, checking the dispersal tanks, tapping each rivet and seam like a priest blessing a battle flag. I could feel it building inside me, a calm, righteous certainty that I hadn't felt since this whole nightmare began. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about principle. About drawing a line in the dirt, or in this case, across the sky. By the time I climbed into the cockpit and strapped myself in, the first cars were already pulling up along the dirt road. I watched through the dusty windshield as a parade of luxury SUVs, glossy rental vans, and vintage convertibles crawled onto my land like an invasion force. Karen had gone all out. She'd rented white wooden chairs, a full-size portable dance floor, 3 massive event tents, a mobile bar truck, and even one of those ridiculous flower walls where guests could pose for pictures holding hand-lettered signs that said things like "Love wins" and "Forever starts here, caterers in." Black and white uniforms scurried between the tents, setting up silver chafing dishes and champagne towers under the sweltering sun, a string quartet tuned up under a canvas awning. Guests in pastel dresses and rented tuxedos strolled across my fields, laughing and sipping mimosas, oblivious to the fact that they were trespassing. My fields, my life's work, turned into a backdrop for someone else's fairy tale. I throttled up the engine, feeling the AgCat shudder and roar beneath me, and taxied down the makeshift runway I'd cleared years ago, a simple strip of flattened dirt lined with faded orange cones. Nobody noticed me at first. They were too busy taking selfies under the wedding arch, too busy pinning corsages and adjusting boutonnieres. Karen herself was easy to spot, even from the air. She was a vision of weaponized suburban bliss, dressed in a blindingly white gown that probably cost more than my entire year's income, her blonde hair pinned into an elaborate updo that sparkled with fake diamonds. She was standing near the archway, clipboard still in hand, barking orders at the wedding planner, and motioning for the flower girls to take their places. I took the AgCat up in a slow, lazy circle, climbing higher into the blue until I was just a speck overhead, hidden by the glare of the sun. Nobody looked up. Nobody noticed the tiny red plane orbiting them like a patient hawk. I checked my instruments. Altitude, perfect. Wind, minimal. Tanks, full and ready. I switched on the external camera I'd mounted under the wing, partly for insurance, partly because I knew no one would ever believe this story otherwise, and angled it to capture the whole field spread out below me like a wedding cake waiting for the knife. The ceremony was starting. A hush fell over the crowd as the string quartet launched into some syrupy rendition of Canon in D. Karen's niece, or maybe her stepdaughter, I didn't know and didn't care, began the slow march down the aisle, scattering rose petals from a silver basket. Behind her, the wedding party lined up like a row of pastel-colored soldiers. Karen linked arms with some poor sap of a groom and began her grand procession down the makeshift aisle, her heels sinking slightly into the soft-tilled soil with every step. I banked the plane into a gentle turn, lining up my approach perfectly with the aisle. I could see the whole scene unfolding below me, the altar, the rows of guests fanning themselves with printed programs, the catering staff nervously adjusting the champagne towers as the heat intensified. I tightened my grip on the stick, flipped open the release valve cover with my other hand, and thumbed the lever halfway down, priming the tanks for deployment. The officiant raised his hands. Karen and the groom reached the altar. The quartet fell silent. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, his voice booming out over the portable sound system. I dropped lower, just below FAA reporting altitude, skimming the tops of the tents and sending the decorative streamers snapping in the turbulence of my prop wash. Heads finally started to turn upward. Fingers pointed. A ripple of confusion ran through the crowd. Some of the guests smiled and waved, thinking I was part of the show, some whimsical country touch Karen had arranged. I smiled grimly inside my cockpit. They were about to get more country charm than they could handle. The officiant droned on. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of..." I yanked the lever all the way down. The tanks released with a satisfying clunk. A dense, heavy cloud of liquefied manure and fertilizer exploded downward in a dark, wet sheet, hitting the crowd dead center like a biblical plague. For a heartbeat, there was silence. just stunned disbelief as the first wave of stinking sludge splattered across the pristine white chairs, the pastel dresses, the linen tablecloths, the imported floral arrangements. Then came the screams, not polite startled gasps, not dainty shrieks. Full-throated, primal, fight-or-flight screams as 300 wedding guests tried to flee in every direction at once, slipping and sliding in the sticky muck, their fine clothes ruined, their carefully styled hair matted to their faces. The flower girl tripped and fell face first into a puddle of brown sludge, shrieking like a banshee. The groom stood frozen, mouth open in horror, as Karen, oh poor, poor Karen, looked down at her once immaculate dress, now dripping and sagging under the weight of cow dung and chemical fertilizer. Her face contorted into a rictus of rage, eyes bulging, veins standing out at her temples like she was about to explode. I pulled the plane into a slow, triumphant arc, trailing a misty vapor of lingering fertilizer behind me, and circled back for a second pass. By now the guests were in full retreat, slipping and stumbling across the field, losing shoes, tearing dresses, knocking over the champagne towers and flower walls in a frantic bid for escape. Caterers abandoned their stations. The string quartet fled, instruments held over their heads like shields. Someone overturned the portable restroom trailer in the chaos, sending a fresh wave of even worse smells rolling across the battlefield. And there, standing alone amid the carnage, was Karen, drenched, dripping, and howling like a wounded animal, shaking her fists at the sky. That's when I noticed the news vans. 3 of them, lined up neatly along the dirt road, cameras rolling. Karen, in her infinite arrogance, had invited the local media to cover her community love story wedding as a goodwill event for Willow Creek. Reporters stood gaping behind their tripods, their live feeds broadcasting the apocalypse in real time to every television in a 50-mile radius. I dipped my wings in a jaunty little salute, then banked westward toward the horizon, the ag cat humming happily around me, the scent of justice thick in the air. As I gained altitude, I allowed myself one last glance over my shoulder. Down below, the wedding was over. The guests were gone, the tents collapsed, the fields empty save for a few lonely folding chairs half submerged in mud. Karen stood alone at the ruined altar, her white gown now a dripping, brown-stained rag, her dreams dissolving into the dirt she had tried to steal. By Sunday morning, the fallout was already making national news. Wedding turned war zone, blared one headline, accompanied by a still frame from the live news footage. Karen, arms raised toward the heavens, her face twisted in pure fury as brown sludge rained from above. Another showed the guests slipping and sliding through the wreckage like penguins caught in an oil spill. I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the morning light spill across my fields, feeling more at peace than I had in months. It didn't last long. By noon, the lawsuits started flying faster than summer mosquitoes. My mailbox overflowed with thick manila envelopes, each one thicker than the last, each one stamped with the heavy seal of some big city law firm. Every guest who had so much as stepped onto my property was now suing the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association for damages, emotional trauma, property destruction, injuries sustained while slipping in manure, dry cleaning bills for ruined tuxedos and dresses, replacement fees for wedding gifts destroyed in the chaos. Some even added claims against Karen personally for misrepresentation and negligence. The numbers were astronomical. Last I counted, there were 37 active lawsuits, and that was just in the first week. Karen tried to spin it at first, as expected. She went on the local morning news in a fresh pastel pantsuit, her hair shellacked into place, and gave a strained interview about an unfortunate misunderstanding and how the community would heal together through resilience and shared vision. But no amount of smiling could scrub away the footage. Everyone had already seen footage of her standing at the altar, shrieking obscenities into the sky, covered head to toe in something very much not love and sunshine. Worse still, the city took notice. See, it turns out, when you orchestrate a massive, unlicensed gathering on private property, without permits, without insurance, without so much as a written agreement, people in suits start paying attention, real suits, city attorneys, county clerks, zoning inspectors. Turns out, Karen's little empire was built on more than just passive-aggressive newsletters and pastel bake sales. The investigation opened quietly at first, a simple request for HOA financial records. Karen, true to form, tried to stonewall, claimed the records were confidential, cited privacy rights. But the lawsuits had cracked her armor, and once one board member, a Weasley guy named Troy who sold Karen out faster than you could say subpoena, turned state's witness, it was like pulling a loose thread on a cheap sweater. Within a month, the whole ugly truth unraveled. Willow Creek's HOA had been skimming money off the books for years. Inflated landscaping contracts awarded to Karen's cousin's company. Community improvement grants funneled into personal home renovations. Kickbacks from local vendors in exchange for exclusive contracts. Fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud. The list went on and on. The city froze the HOA's accounts pending investigation. Karen resigned in disgrace 3 days later, claiming health reasons in a hysterical Facebook post that blamed small-minded people for poisoning the spirit of community. She fled town before the month was out, her pastel dream crumbling to dust behind her. As for the wedding, well, that didn't last either. Turns out, the groom hadn't been too thrilled about starting married life soaked in cow slurry, immortalized forever in national news blooper reels. According to the papers, the marriage was annulled within a week. Irreconcilable differences, they said. Though the real difference, I imagine, was that he didn't want to spend the rest of his life cleaning Karen's messes, literal or figurative. With the HOA in shambles, the lawsuits piled up like autumn leaves. Willow Creek Estates went into receivership, and the bank put the entire development up for auction to pay off the mounting debts. I heard later that investors scooped it up for pennies on the dollar, and they weren't too interested in preserving Karen's vision of community harmony. The Welcome Center was bulldozed. The pastel mailboxes replaced with standard-issue black metal ones. The manicured parks went wild and overgrown. Willow Creek became just another sad footnote in the long, slow story of suburban decay. Meanwhile, back on my farm, I decided it was time to send a little message of my own. With some of the payout money from the HOA's insurance collapse, they settled early to avoid more courtroom humiliation. I commissioned a sign, not just any sign. A massive, gleaming slab of weathered steel, 10 feet tall and 20 feet wide, bolted into reinforced concrete visible from the main road and from every corner of my property line. It showed a stylized image of my old crop duster, silhouetted against a field, its cargo bay open wide. Beneath it, in bold letters tall enough to read from a half-mile away, were the words, "Private farmland. Trespassers will be fertilized." I had it lit up at night with solar floodlights so it glowed like a beacon. Tourists started stopping on the side of the road to take pictures. Some local artists even painted it onto t-shirts, and a few months later, someone made a parody country song about it that actually got a little radio play. I didn't mind. Let them laugh. Let them remember. It was a warning carved in steel and spite. Not long after, I upgraded the gates too. Heavy iron ones, black as the ace of spades, topped with old-fashioned spikes sharp enough to gut a deer. I installed motion-activated cameras, reinforced the perimeter fencing, and put up legal notices every 20 feet along the property line. No ambiguity, no confusion. This land wasn't a green space. It wasn't a community garden. It wasn't a photo op. It was mine. Always had been, always would be. Some folks asked if I regretted it, if I wished I'd handled it differently, maybe just sued quietly or let it go. I just smiled, sipped my coffee, and pointed to the sky. Because the best part? After all the dust settled, after the lawsuits and the resignations and the bankruptcies, the city quietly lifted the old no-fly restrictions they'd put on low-altitude flights near residential zones. Willow Creek Estates was no longer considered a protected community area. It was just empty land again. And my old ag cat? She still sat in the barn, tanks cleaned and polished, engine purring like a lazy cat every time I turned her over, just in case. Because sometimes the world needs reminding. Around here, we take care of our own. Around here, trespassers aren't met with fences or angry words. They're met with wings overhead and fertilizer raining down like a biblical judgment. I stood out on my porch that evening, the sun bleeding red across the horizon, the fields whispering in the breeze, the steel sign catching the last light and throwing it back like a mirror. Peace had returned to my farm, real peace. The kind you earn, one hard battle at a time. I raised my coffee mug to the setting sun, to the wind in the trees, to the slow buzz of dragonflies skating across the pond. I didn't need a wedding. I didn't need a plaque. I didn't need a ceremony. I had something better, something stronger than any HOA, any court, any Karen with a clipboard could ever hope to steal. I had my land, my sky, my name written in dust and sweat and stubbornness across the wide, wild earth. And if anybody else ever got it in their heads to try and take it from me again, well, they'd learn real fast what fertilizer really smells like.